Argentina's president-elect Alberto Fernandez celebrates his victory after a visit to the outgoing leader Mauricio Macri. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera replaces 8 of his ministers, including the Interior Minister Andrés Chadwick. The British Parliament rejects Prime Minister Boris Johnson's call for December elections. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is From the South. The winner of Argentina's presidential election, Alberto Fernandez, has been met with his defeated rival, President Mauricio Macri. Fernandez arrived at the Casa Rosada Palace to begin to make arrangements for the transition. The president-elect has promised a sharp move away from Macri's neoliberal policies when he takes office on December 10th, but he will still have to confront Argentina's deep financial and currency crisis. The Frente de Todos party, led by Fernandez, along with former President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, won a total of 48% of the vote in Sunday's presidential election. Mauricio Macri came second with 40%. People across Argentina celebrated Fernandez's victory as they hope that this is the end of the severe austerity policies under President Macri, which have seen the rates of poverty and unemployment rise dramatically.
The people are waking up. We cannot stand the oppression of those who have more and they don't give a damn about us. The working people, the poor. So I am happy because the people still have the hope and my daughter will have a better future.
It is fair that Fernandez won because of everything that Macri has made us go through. Hopefully, we can do better and make Argentina the way it was with Cristina.
I think that the current government did everything wrong. They had bad economic policies, which impacted a lot of people who work, and they practically destroyed the middle class. The results that Macri ended up with are well-deserved.
Following Fernandez's victory, the Argentine peso opened slightly stronger against the U.S. dollar. Nonetheless, the central bank announced new currency controls, reportedly due to concerns over outflows of foreign exchange reserves accelerating after Mauricio Macri was voted out of office.
Effective today, we've reduced to $200 per month the maximum amount that can be purchased by individuals with prior authorization from the central bank. I know that this measure, even being a temporary one, is very strict and impacts a lot of people. The goal, I repeat, is to preserve the reserves during this transition period and until the new government defines its economic policies and the uncertainty dissipates.
The new management director of the International Monetary Fund has congratulated Alberto Fernandez on his victory. She tweeted, "We look forward to engaging with his administration to tackle Argentina's economic challenges." Before the elections, the IMF suspended payments on its huge $57 billion bailout deal with Mauricio Macri. Earlier, we spoke with Sam Halvorsen, a lecturer in human geography at Queen Mary University of London and a researcher of political parties and elections in Argentina. We asked how Argentina's new government will handle the economy and Macri's $50 billion IMF loan deal.
Yeah, so again, here, the kind of initial indications of Alberto Fernandez and his expected kind of ministerial team in the economy has been to kind of renegotiate quite clearly. Not necessarily take the more radical posture which was taken by the previous government of trying to claim certain debts as illegitimate or kind of move beyond it, but renegotiate what would be a better or fairer deal for the people of Argentina. And I think this is going to be a kind of one of the more interesting questions about relating to your previous point about how revolutionary or radical are they, how, we know that Alberto Fernandez comes from a relatively moderate position of trying to seek compromise. And I think that one of the key questions would be, and for him especially, how he wants to position himself, Argentina, in relation to both the regional, but in particular the kind of international market, and thinking about China and the USA. So I think, one thing that everyone's agreed is that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult, and there's going to be some very tough decisions that they're going to have to make very early on, which could really mark the future of their presidency, but also how they respond to social movements which can't wait for national level economic packages to come in. There's urgent pressing needs, and they're going to have to try and find immediate solutions to that, which is of course going to be a struggle given the context.
Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner and Alberto Fernandez congratulated re-elected Bolivian President Evo Morales during their own victory speech. We asked Professor Halvorsen about Argentina's foreign policy shift to come.
Yeah, so I think there will be a clear shift, and I think from a Latin American regional perspective, we've already seen that. I think that Mauricio Macri marked a very different set of priorities compared to both the previous governments of the Kirchners, but especially Alberto Fernandez. So, for example, how they've responded to the elections in Bolivia, and the clear on their victory speech last night, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner and Alberto Fernandez both congratulating the clear victory of Evo Morales. A very strong criticism of what's been happening in Chile, and of course, and perhaps one of the biggest challenges or issues to follow will be the relationship with Jair Bolsonaro, who has already come out and made some rather undiplomatic comments in relation to how problematic it is that we've got Alberto Fernandez voted in, having previously talked about ridiculous things such as removing them from the Mercosur and so on. So I think, the big picture here, those of course having Argentina as a major economy in the region now, and also we mustn't forget how their relationship to Mexico. We've also got Uruguay, who are waiting to see what will happen in an eventual ballotage, which is indicating that the centre-left broad front will probably be removed from power. So it's going to be a very different regional climate than had come before. But certainly Alberto Fernandez suggesting that he wants to maintain the kind of previous kind of regional approach of the centre-left governments in Latin America, while also having necessarily to maintain an international link with regards to their export-based economy, particularly thinking about the US and about China.
In Chile, President Sebastián Piñera has announced the appointment of 8 new ministers, including a new interior minister. The former Minister of Interior and Security, Andrés Chadwick, has been the target of many criticisms due to the highly repressive actions of the security forces. Replacing Chadwick is Gustavo Blumel, the former Secretary General of the presidency. The Minister of the Economy has also been replaced. The announcement came hours after President Piñera lifted the state of emergency in all regions. Protests have been ongoing across Chile demanding economic and political changes. In response, 20,000 soldiers and police were deployed on the streets. Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk has the details from Santiago.
Yes, we're standing again in front of the presidential palace, La Moneda on my back. The cabinet reshuffle that was so much expected over the weekend, that was to include new faces, many new ministers, probably opposition members, so it could be called National Unity Cabinet, was not so. We don't know exactly what happened, but what we saw is only 2 new faces in the cabinet, the ministers of economy and finance. The rest were swaps between ministries and vice ministries, and probably the most controversial issue is that the Minister of Education, Housing and Transportation are remaining. Also the Minister of Defense. They are all very much questioned in the past few days because of the human rights violations, and because health, education and housing are those which are more relevant to the population who has raised up in protest. There were new demonstrations here this morning, and they were repressed as usual with water cannons and gas. People are shouting around the presidential palace. These women are being told, women and these gentlemen are being told to leave the area and not to express their discontent with what is happening in the country. An impeachment is being processed by opposition deputies. Today they reached the amount of signatures necessary for this impeachment. They say it's not clear whether they will win the vote in the parliament, but it is a moral, ethical duty to impeach the president for the human rights violations, torture, killings, illegal arrests, and harassing that has been taking place for 10 days now.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Bolivian miners have marched in the capital La Paz to show their support for the recently re-elected President Evo Morales. Miners from the Huanuni Mine Workers Union marched down the city's central El Parado Avenue. Some even detonated small sticks of dynamite to celebrate Morales' victory. They said the opposition, along with several media outlets, are trying to delegitimize the election result, even though it was declared by Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal. The re-elected Vice President of Bolivia, Alvaro Garciallera, has thanked the people for giving the ruling MAS party such a resounding victory. He showed how this was reflected in the geographical distribution of the vote and in the absolute majority obtained in both houses of the Assembly.
The movement towards socialism is not only a victorious party, but one that was victorious across the country. It won in the vast majority of municipalities. Out of a total of 342 municipalities, the MAS won in 289 of them. That is more than 85% of the municipalities where the MAS won. There is a resounding victory, and an unchallengeable one. And for this, we want to thank very much indeed the trust expressed by the people, both in the countryside and in the cities. In the east and in the west, in the north and in the south, people voted for stability and growth, for the welfare of their families, and against any return to conservatism. The second important aspect is what you can see here, which is the composition of the Plurinational Legislative Assembly. The MAS won 21 senators, out of a total of 36 senators. That is 3 more than half the Senate, which means the MAS has an absolute majority in the upper house. In the lower house, where there are 130 seats, the MAS won 68, which also gives it an absolute majority.
After general elections on Sunday in Uruguay, the country is headed to a vote on November 24th to elect their new president. Citizens will decide between the former mayor of Montevideo and candidate for the Broad Front Party, Daniel Martinez, and former senator and candidate for the Conservative National Party, Luis Lacalle Pou. Neither candidate managed to get enough votes on Sunday to win in the first round, with Martinez obtaining 39% and Lacalle Pou 28%. Hundreds of residents in the Mexican city of Culiacan have taken to the streets to demand peace after a shootout between soldiers and a drug cartel gunman earlier this month. On October 17th, members of the Sinaloa cartel engaged in a gun battle with authorities who sought to arrest Ovidio Guzman, a son of jailed drug trafficker Joaquín El Chapo Guzman, in Culiacan. After learning that Mexican authorities seek to extradite Ovidio to the United States, the cartel erected 19 blockades with heavily armed gunmen. While Ovidio managed to escape, the shootout lasted about 4 hours, leaving citizens scurried for cover.
We no longer want to be afraid. We no longer want to have to hide. I want to send this message to the entire country. Culiacan is not what people think. Everyone thinks that we are afraid and that we are hiding. And as you can see, we are not hiding.
A new wave of protests in Honduras has led to heavy military repression. Protesters are still on the streets as new allegations have surfaced linking the country's president to organized crime.
President Juan Orlando Fernandez has denied these allegations and has vowed to clear his name. He says he intends to do so with the support of his party and public workers.
Criminals who appeared as witnesses showed how easy it is to lie with immunity. They tried to deny the anti-crime strategies developed by the state.
While President Fernandez has had the support of the armed forces, the people have vowed to keep up protest action until he resigns. There have been calls for greater mobilizations as the people demand that their voices are heard.
He has to go because he's a drug trafficking dictator. He's a criminal. It's 100% proven that they stole the election.
We are under a dictatorial regime and under the rule of a drug dealer. It's a shame for Honduras.
He is a thief, and he has condemned 70% of the population to live in poverty.
The situation in Honduras is worsening. Other public officials have also been accused of crimes, and they've also threatened violence. But the people remain resilient in their struggle.
At this moment, across Latin America, we have people mobilizing, and this is a sign of the class struggle in the continent, and it's strengthening.
In his refusal to leave office, Juan Orlando Hernandez is backed by the high commanders of the police and the military, who have used force against protesters and violated human rights.
We will continue fighting because it's our obligation. Our struggle is for the people and their independence. We are not mistaken. We are not only asking for the drug trafficker dictator to leave, but for the end of the neoliberal model, which is negatively affecting everyone.
Security near the Honduran government's headquarters was tightened since the president's brother, Juan Antonio Tony Hernandez, was found guilty in a vast drug conspiracy case in the U.S. The president has instructed the armed forces to impose order and repress any mobilization that comes close to that area.
Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley has criticized her political contenders, saying they are incapable of leading Barbados. Mottley was especially critical of Democratic Labour Party President Verla de Pesa.
Who would we be leaving Barbados to if we were to fail? Who? To Verla? Who has moved from pillar to post and who is a political water lily with no roots in anything? Floating, floating, floating. She has moved from Christchurch West. She talks about going to St. James because she says she grew up there. She talks about St. John because she believes that that is an easy pick, but she don't know Charles Griffith waiting for her. And then somebody said, but your family from St. Lucie, go to St. Lucie. Now, if that is not a political water lily floating all about, I don't know what is.
Thousands of people across Brazil celebrated the 74th birthday of jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Sunday. Let's find out more.
10,000 people from across Brazil gathered to the Lula Libre Beagle in front of the federal building where former President Lula da Silva has been imprisoned for nearly 600 days.
Lula is happy because he knows he has not been forgotten. There was a moment when he first was sentenced in which he feared the people would forget about him, but I think they have proven that they will not forget. The evil media has not managed to erase his memory or his history, what he did and what he can still do.
Aunt Celia, one of Lula's favorite chefs back in Brasilia, traveled over 1,000 kilometers with food for the former president.
I came to cook for him. He's the president of the poor, of the people. His love for us is something incredible, something we can barely understand. He loves everyone equally.
Solidarity acts in support of Lula took place in 86 cities in Brazil and 28 cities abroad. People called for popular uprisings for increased presence at the polls in response to neoliberalism.
Latin America is rising against neoliberalism. We had progressive governments that were defeated by neoliberalism, but have been proven their formula is not good for the people. I hope that today's gift for Lula is the election of Alberto Fernandez in Argentina, while the Chilean people continue to rise up against decades of oppression and inequality.
The celebrations coincided with an ongoing debate in the Supreme Court that could annul Lula's sentences and set him free. On top of this, the court is scheduling a vote on a writ of habeas corpus to suspend Sergio Mora's role in the Lava Jato investigation for the many irregularities he committed during Lula's case.
There's a feeling that in the next few weeks, Lula could be freed, and that's why events like these are so important.
Despite many expectations for Lula's freedom being put on the doorstep of the Supreme Court, demonstrators agree that pressure on the street cannot flatter.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's bid for the country to go to the polls on December 12th may have been defeated in the Parliament, but Johnson is set to try again for early polls. With Labour Party members abstaining from the vote, some 299 UK lawmakers supported the Prime Minister's motion to trigger a December 12th election, but that was short of the 434 votes needed. However, as one door to an early election closed, another has seemingly opened. The Prime Minister will now bring a bill seeking the support of two anti-Brexit parties, the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalists. Once again, proposed to be held on December 12th. The chance of that law being passed is significantly higher, as it only requires a simple majority. On the other hand, those same anti-Brexit parties have offered to back an election on December 9th instead. This will stop any chance of the PM's Brexit deal being approved before the Parliament is dissolved.
The ayes to the right, 299. To the noes to the left, 70. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it, the ayes have it, but the motion has not obtained the majority required under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011, and because I'm coming to the right, honourable gentleman, because the majority required has not been reached, the noes have it. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Turkey has issued a warning to the Syrian Kurdish fighters not to remain behind in the area after the expiration of the withdrawal deadline. The Turkish Foreign Minister has said that his country's military will attack any Syrian Kurdish fighter who remains along the border area after Tuesday night. The minister made this statement after receiving reports that some Kurdish fighters have remained behind while others pulled out. The Kurdish withdrawal is in line with a Russian-Turkish agreement reached last week.
There are some who have withdrawn. This has been confirmed by Syrian regime elements. Russia has confirmed this, but it is not possible to say there has been a complete withdrawal. There's contact between our soldiers on this issue and a military delegation coming from Russia.
In Syria, local people have expressed their unhappiness with the Turkish operation in the area. They marched in the streets, holding banners which denounce the current war situation in the Syrian-Turkey border area. Demonstrators said the attacks were affecting their normal everyday life.
We came out today to condemn the Turkish invasion and their attack in northern and eastern Syria, on Ras Al Ain and Tal Abyad.
Protesters in Lebanon cut major roads in Beirut using cars, tents, and dumpsters to keep pressure on the government. Security forces were deployed in larger numbers on Monday in Beirut, but have so far allowed the barricades to remain in place. Banks, universities, and schools remain closed since last week. This is the 13th consecutive day of protests calling on the resignation of government authorities. The head of the Israeli Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, said his meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a coalition government did not yield any progress. Last Wednesday, Gantz was given a mandate to form a new coalition government after Netanyahu's efforts ended in a deadlock.
Yesterday, I met Likud chairman Benjamin Netanyahu. It was a thorough meeting. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to achieve any real progress. I hope we will achieve it in the future. The best option was and still is a unity government headed by the blue and white, together with Likud, the way the people have voted. The worst option of all, especially for the Israeli people, is elections.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.
The life is full of